So let's get underway. So some of you I know, some of you I don't, well, many of you I don't know. So let's just explain who I am. You can see a couple of pictures there. I won't bore you with a great lot of detail. I'll just simply say that you can see that I obviously give presentations, keynote presentations. I run workshops. I coach. I've written 19 books, which I'm proud to say. I'm working on number 20 right now, and you can see there in the screen I play rugby here in Brisbane in the Golden Oldies competition, which is a bit sad at my age because, and you can see I'm running pretty quickly, but you would be running quickly if that fellow was chasing you as well on the field. But we only play every second week because it takes 2 weeks to recover at my age. So there you go, a little bit about me. Let's go launching into what we're actually going to cover today. So I guess there's three things I want to do. Basically, I want to talk about the problem of psychological safety. So it's obviously a problem. It's not a good thing. It's a problem and it affects all walks of life in terms of the workplace. I want to talk about a solution. And what is the solution to this? And, you know, with my 20 years working in this area, I am convinced that there is only one real solution, a sustainable solution. And of course, I'm going to finish up telling you how I can help you and in a partnership situation. So those are the three things I'm going to cover in our session this morning. So let's talk about the problem. Now, the first thing I think we should do is just define, well, what do we mean by psychological safety? People throw that term around. It's the vogue term now. So let's actually talk about it a little bit and actually think about this. I'm just going to admit some people in just a moment. I'm just going to admit a whole lot of people in. Okay, there we go. Welcome. So psychological safety, it's about this feeling of wanting to speak up in the workplace. So if people are sitting there mutely at a meeting, and for example, if you're the team leader and you say to the team members, look, anyone got any questions? Anyone got any comments on what I've just said? And there's dead silence. It's probably likely that people feel a risk of speaking up. That's essentially what that means. It's not that they don't have any questions, and it's not that they don't have any great ideas. They absolutely do. And so they just don't feel safe. I'm just letting a few more people in. People are likely to ask questions for clarification. People will often offer suggestions and ideas. That would be definitely a symptom of a psychologically safe workplace. People will admit mistakes. I find this is a really interesting one, that people often do sweep things under the carpet in a psychologically unsafe workplace. People will challenge assumptions that are being made, and people will express concerns. Now, there's a way of doing all of these things, obviously, but of course, those are the characteristics of a psychologically safe workplace. So you might want to think about your own workplace, all the workplaces you work for, and think, well, how many of those boxes could I actually tick? And it's probably not many, from my experience at least. So let's now go and look a little further at this and talk about what psychological safety is not about. It's not necessarily about being nice. Now, actually, if people were nicer in the workplace, I think everyone would agree that's a great thing. But this is not necessarily just about being nice. And I think it's very important that we understand that. Of course, nice is great, but, you know, sometimes when you speak up, people might not be happy with what you've said, but nevertheless, they feel safe enough to do so. So that's what it's not. So let's actually now talk about some of the issues around that. So let me just move on. And on again. Okay, so if we look at the statistics that are out there, there's lots of research on this, but I've just picked Gallup up, and 17% of employees feel that their organisation has a high level of psychological safety. Only 17%. Now, that's pretty stark. I'm sure you would agree. So that's not good. Sorry, I'm just letting people in at the same time, which is going to be a bit ambidextrous to do that. Okay, so let me now move on. So let me talk about the 12 problems of a psychologically unsafe workplace. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually share with you what the problems are with having an unsafe workplace. When I finish this, what I'm actually going to do is give you an opportunity to discuss in small groups your own experiences with your own workplace. And you might want to touch on some of these 12 that I'm going to share with you. Okay. Just letting more people in. Okay, so let's look at the first one. So these aren't necessarily in any order, but silence replaces honesty. So when you're in a meeting and you can't get people to participate, and maybe there's one or two people that are quite happy to participate, but the others aren't willing to participate, then that is probably a symptom of an unsafe workplace, without a doubt. It's not, as I said earlier, because people don't have something that they want to offer. Of course they have something they want to offer, but they just don't feel comfortable offering it.
Excuse
Another
me,
symptom
Tim.
would be, yeah,
We seem to have a black square in the middle of your slides. We can't see the presentation material.
oh, okay, that's interesting. I don't know how I fix that.
If you don't mind,
A
please.
big black, oh, I think I know what it is. Is it?
Thank you.
Oh, right. It's people coming in. I'm just letting them in as they come. Thanks for letting me know that. Okay. People will actually hide their mistakes. Mistakes get hidden instead of fixed. In other words, we sweep things under the carpet. And that obviously is a problem. And I work across 21 industries. I see that happening a lot because the risk of admitting you're making a mistake, and of course we all make mistakes, let's be honest, the risk of making a mistake is far greater than admitting it is far greater than actually perhaps sweeping it under the carpet or pointing the finger of blame at someone else. And that's problematic because what it means then is a leader's got to spend more time, effort, and energy trying to get to the bottom of what it is or where it originated from, not to blame someone necessarily, although that could be the case, but to actually fix the problem. Okay. So another problem that we face with a psychologically unsafe workplace is that innovation collapses. People don't come to suggestions with new ideas. Now, I find this fascinating because most organisations actually, they actually have innovation or continuous improvement on their values list. But when you actually scratch the surface, there's not a lot of innovation, there's not a lot of continuous improvement, and there's not a lot of people suggesting ideas. It's not that people don't have ideas. It's because they think, well, things are the way they are, and if I try and rock the boat and suggest something, even though somebody has asked me, it's likely that it'll fall on deaf ears. So that's a problem, isn't it, in 2025 when we're moving at this ridiculously fast-paced, accelerated change and uncertainty environment. So that's a problem. Another problem, of course, is that performance conversations disappear. And in fact, even giving feedback that's constructive doesn't happen. So you find organisations which leaders might grit their teeth and they don't bother to raise issues that need to be raised. Or perhaps even employees or team members don't raise things that need to be raised as well with their manager because they're worried about the consequences of that. So the whole idea of having performance conversations isn't real. It isn't there. Doesn't happen. Conflict turns toxic. And, we've all heard the concept of passive aggressive. So on the one hand, we kind of just, ignore somebody. And then at another stage, we actually jump up and down and get upset with people. Now, that is obviously a toxic environment. It's not a good environment. People don't like working in that. So conflict can then blow over and people can get extremely upset all of a sudden because they've had enough. And they've been holding things in for so long. And that can be a problem. And other people, of course, are just holding on to their own anger and annoyance. So that is another big symptom of this whole notion. Decision making slows down. Now, from a managerial perspective, what will happen is that when decisions have to be made, we have to go and get 5 signatures, or we have to actually go and, I had an organisation where I won't, it'll remain nameless, but the point was that they had to go through 5 signatures to pay me. And it was just like, it's not going to happen in about 20 minutes. It's going to happen when the person's ready to actually sign that form. So there's all of these processes in place that actually slow things down, and decisions don't get made quickly. And in fact, often leaders will sit on decisions and they won't make those decisions. And that's a problem as well. A big problem is staff turnover. And of course, there's a lovely saying that the only rats that leave a sinking ship are the ones that can swim. So in other words, if things aren't going well in the workplace, probably the first people to leave are the people who are the people you don't want to leave. They are the people who are actually great at their job, they do a great job, and they're actually stars. But they have options because they can go across the road and get another job. Whereas the people who perhaps aren't stars may not have the choices of leaving. That's a costly exercise for organisations to lose your best people. And that can happen in a psychologically unsafe workplace without a doubt. Another issue is that engagement plummets. And we know from the surveys around the world that engagement levels are not increasing, they're actually decreasing across all industries, which is fascinating. There's no particular industry where it's going up and all the others are going down. They're all in some cases going down. And some surveys suggest that only 17 to 18% of people are actually engaged in their work, which really is quite scary. And then when you look at the disengagement level, it's likely that there are some of those people who are actively disengaged. In other words, they're trying to undermine what's going on in the workplace. Other people, of course, are passively disengaged. So, but nevertheless, disengagement is higher than engagement as such. So that's a major issue as well. Accountability, big issue again, and I see a lot of values on the wall that suggest that accountability, is a core value in this organisation. But when it comes to the crunch, people in an unsafe working environment don't take accountability. They will push the accountability to somebody else. A simple example, a team member will go to their manager and ask them to make a decision on something that is very, very simple to make and doesn't really require the manager's involvement. And they're doing that because they feel it's a risk to be accountable for that decision, so they defer to the manager as such. And that's a simple example, but there are a lot of examples where people just don't take any accountability. I see cross-functional communication issues in a lot of organisations where this department or this team won't talk to that team. This team blames that team for the problems. And so you've got a situation where neither team is really taking any responsibility or any accountability for solving the communication problems that exist between the two teams. And in most cases, the issue is really between the teams. It's not with one team or the other. So accountability is a huge issue as well. And psychological distress. People can obviously feel more stressed. People are stressed enough as it is. They don't need to be more stressed than they actually are. And sometimes people will suffer in silence. But we do know from statistics that people are certainly seeking more help these days for psychological distress. And anxiety and depression is at an all-time high. And a psychologically safe work environment actually does not help that. In fact, it makes it a lot worse. Some people suffer in silence, some people don't. but the reality is that psychological distress increases in an unsafe working environment. Okay. Managers become bottlenecks, and this is an interesting one because managers themselves, may feel uncomfortable about making a decision. I mentioned this sort of a little earlier because they're worried about the implications of it in terms of how it might offend or how it might upset somebody else. So they'll sit on the decision or they won't make it or they'll try and defer it, whatever they might do, but they certainly will not make a decision. And what that means sometimes is that then the team members sense this and they're reluctant to come to the manager to make a legitimate decision because they think that nothing's going to happen. So I won't bother going to them. And when they do, they can be quite frustrated because they know that the manager's going to sit on it because they don't feel comfortable making the decision because of the environment they're in. So there's a lot of issues there with that. So what's the cost with all this? And I know some of you are from the private sector, some of you are from the public sector, and some of you from the non-for-profit sector. So let's actually have a look in broad terms. The cost for the private sector is probably fairly clear, and that is profits and revenue reduce because of these issues that I talked about. So obviously profit margins reduce, people's job security is a threat because people might have to lay off other people because they're not making the revenue to cover the wages. What about in the public sector? And I know there's many of you from the public sector and local government and state government and so on. Well, when you've got an unsafe workplace, what it does is it means that public efficiency and effectiveness reduces. Decisions are slower. People are less responsive. And of course, the public get very upset about that, and rightly so. But that's what happens in the public sector. And in the not-for-profit sector, your ability to meet the needs of the community will suffer because, again, you may not be able to be responsive. There might be confusions in communication. There might be lack of accountability. So it's costly. This whole issue is very costly. So you can see I just painted a picture very quickly of what some of the problems are with an unsafe working environment. Now, what I'd like, and just before I move into discussing this with you, just to sum all this up, and I think it's important to say this, that if we're living in a world where communication is on the ascendancy, there's no shortage of communication tools. In fact, they're everywhere. We get distracted by them. You can click a button and talk to someone on the other side of the world instantly. So we know all that. And you would think that's a great thing. Well, it is a great thing. But paradoxically, connection is going down. So the ability for people to connect is actually going down while the ability to communicate is going up. Now, when I was a child, we knew who our neighbours were. We knew who, and there were corner stores in those days. We actually knew who owned a corner store. We used to say hello to people in the street and all this kind of thing. Think about it now. It's obviously that's a real issue. And of course, this is an issue. The workplace is not isolated from this. So I'm just painting a picture here about the problem that we've got around an unsafe working environment. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask you to, we'll break up into some groups. I'm going to actually do some breakout rooms. And what we're going to do is I'm going to get you to, I won't be in the room necessarily. I'll jump in every now and again, but I just simply want you to introduce yourself to whoever else is the group. Put your camera on. That would make things reasonable. I'd like you to, if you could, appoint a leader to report back. Now, you don't have to do anything terribly difficult. Just let us know what the issues were that you heard in the team. And what I actually want you to do in this breakout session is I'd like you to rate your workplace on a scale of 1 to 5 on psychological safety. And I've given you the blueprint about what some of those things are. So 5 is high, 1 is low. So you just give it a score. Now, you don't have to mention your company or your organisations. You don't have to worry about doing that necessarily unless you feel comfortable doing that, but give it a number. And then I'd like you to have a discussion in your groups about some examples that may be that back up your claim, and maybe some of the examples from some of the issues that I've just raised already. So that's what we're going to do. I'm just going to stop sharing and put you into groups.
Ability to be able to identify them. So I think inside of the psychological safety space, there's also the important thing to mention around legislation and the responsibilities of, or the expectation that we actually report a psychosocial hazard just like we would a trip hazard or things like that as well. So that definitely needs to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. That's a really interesting concept. Yeah, to be able to consider that as something to report. Yeah, absolutely. Look, let's talk about what I see as the solution. And I guess the question is, how do we improve psychological safety? I think some of you were alluding to what I certainly think is the answer as well, but I believe the answer to this is simply this. The answer is one conversation at a time. In other words, it's about conversations. I think workplaces are conversations. So if you think about your workplace, you have all these conversations going on depending on the size, maybe hundreds, thousands or whatever. Some go in the boardroom, some go in the lunchroom, some go in the car park, some of them go in the bathroom. They go on. And the conversations, I believe, are a real clue as to how culture is in a workplace. What's safe to talk about, what's not. So that to me is the issue. And if you actually look at workplaces, you've got on the continuum, we've got three different types of conversations that we have. We have idle chit-chat on the left-hand side, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be having that. I mean, that's that social lubricant. How was your weekend? How was your holiday? All that kind of stuff, absolutely. And then on the right-hand side, we have project-based conversations, which is about getting the product or the service out the door or whatever that might be. Now, those things are not in short supply. But what is in short supply is what's in the middle there, which I call developmental conversations. That is leaders having regular catch-ups with their team members to talk about not their personal development, the team members' development. Now, I will guarantee your good leaders do this. But of course, good leaders are in short supply. And as some of you just alluded to from the breakout sessions, some people don't have the skills or don't feel confident to do this. But I believe it's the answer. I believe it's the answer to this issue of culture. Let me take that a step. I would say that conversations or regular catch-ups, developmental conversations, are underrated. And of course, if people don't know what to talk about, they revert to either idle chit-chat or project-based work. In other words, and then they think, well, there's no point in us actually having this meeting once a month because we're just talking about work, or we're just having a social chit-chat. So people need some guidelines and some processes to actually know what to talk about, what questions to ask, and how to do these things. And that's where I guess I come in. So let's talk about how I can help. So there are a couple of things here that I'm going to share with you as to what I've found as a solution to this issue. And I think I just make the general statement that if you want to transform your organisational culture, you must first improve the quality of the conversations in your organisations. And that becomes key. And of course, people know what's safe and what's not safe. So let's actually take that a step further and have a look at this. Have the next slide. So the 5 conversations framework I put together quite a few years ago. In fact, I was actually hoping that it would replace the performance review, but I'm still hoping. But anyway, let's assume that you've got to have a performance review. I don't want to get into the debate about that, but if you want to know my view about it, it's probably fairly obvious. I don't think they're very useful. There's no research that I've seen anywhere that shows that they actually improve performance. And most people dread them. So I kind of wonder why we have them. But anyway, we won't get into that debate. But even if you've got a performance review, what about what happens between performance reviews? That's what I'm interested in. And so the 5 conversations framework, as you can see, is 5 conversations with a theme that are conducted once a month with your team, between the leader and their team member. So it's a monthly exercise. So I'll just give you a quick overview, just to give you an idea and a sense of how it works. So you can see that there's a climate review conversation at the beginning. Now, it's got obviously nothing to do with the weather, but the climate is as in morale, people's job satisfaction, those sorts of things. Now, we spend thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars, and even hundreds in some cases, on these engagement surveys that are done online, which kind of, and of course people get upset because they don't see the results and nothing changes. My argument is, why don't we just sit down and have a talk about it? So the first question that I have in the framework is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you describe, what rating would you give your current job satisfaction? Now, obviously job satisfaction ebbs and flows. We get that. But what I'm trying to do is to open up a conversation about how people are feeling at work. Because if I just said to people, how are you feeling at work? Yeah, fine. By doing that, they give me a number. So let's say they gave me a 7. Then I might say, why a 7? And now I'm going to get some insight into what's happening in their world. And then I'm going to ask them, is 7 as good as it gets? Because some people think 7 is as good as it gets. So let's not assume that they think they can be an 8, a 9 or a 10. Let's ask them the question. Let's say they say yes. Then you say, well, what is it that I need to do, if anything, that might help you go from a 7 to an 8? That's it. 20 minutes. Now, it's not going to solve the world's problems, but it's opening a connection. And then we go into month 2, which is a strengths and talents conversation. Instead of going straight for the jugular, let's talk about what people are good at. Let's start with the positives. And again, you wouldn't actually say that. It's not a good question to say, what is your strengths? Because obviously people just sit there and squirm in the chair. But if you said to people, what's the one thing you enjoy most about the work you do here? Forces them to tell you something. And I can guarantee to you, whatever they tell you is probably something that they're reasonably good at. Why? Because the research shows there's a high correlation between what people enjoy and what people are good at. So I've just unearthed their strength. And then I can actually say, is there anything that we can do to give you more opportunity to do that? Now, the answer might be no, but that's okay. We've had the conversation. We park it. I'm in a better position to know where the person is. And I can certainly delegate, given the opportunity to do that, because there's a greater awareness. Conversation 3, opportunities for growth. I ask them to come to me with opportunities for growth. It's not my job to sit there and say, I think you've got to work on this, or you've got to work on your stakeholder management or whatever. I want them to take ownership. I want them to be accountable. So I want them to, so I start by saying, what's your opportunity for growth over the next 6 months? And let's say they say, well, I'd like to improve my skills in AI, whatever it might be. And then you would say, well, how is that going to help you improve your job? So you start a conversation, and then you can talk about potential ways that might happen. Conversation 4 is a learning and development conversation. You know, HR, and many of you from HR, we send around a training needs analysis once a year. Why don't we just get people to have a conversation about this? Because we've had conversation 2, which is a strengths and talents, and then we have an opportunities for growth, we are now in a position to understand what they can do to build on their strengths and perhaps minimise their opportunities for growth, or improve them. And that's our learning and development conversation. Now, it's not necessarily about sending people off to courses. It might well be budding them up with someone. It might be you mentoring them. There's a whole range of possibilities around that. And we can talk about that one-on-one. And then in conversation 5, whereas conversation 4 is actually talking about them, Conversation 5 is talking about the workplace. So again, I expect them to come to that meeting. I prep them up. They get an email, and the question is, what's one thing that could, what's one idea that can improve our working environment? It doesn't have to be the Nobel Peace Prize, obviously, just something. And people will come to that meeting, and then I will listen to what they have to say, and then I'll sort of play devil's advocate, and I'll say, well, what difference will it make? Because obviously if it makes a lot of difference, it's going to get a tick. How much will it cost? Obviously the less cost gets another tick. And what would be the buy-in from whoever it is that is aimed at? And if that is good buy-in, that gets another tick. So I'm looking for practical, simple things that will improve the working environment. And if I can get a few of those on the board, I'm now going to increase morale and things are going to improve. Now, that's the framework. So people are very skeptical and they say, how could you possibly have these as 20-minute conversations? There's only 2 or 3 questions for each. And the point is, you know, you can have a meaningful conversation in 20 minutes and a dead, dull and boring one for 2 hours. So it's not about the time. So when managers say, I don't have time for all these developmental conversations, I'm too busy putting out bushfires because of the problem we've got with an unsafe environment, it could well be that this investment is not occurring as such. So there you are. There's the framework. I'll take some questions in a moment. I wanted to give you some evidence that this actually works. There was an organisation here in Queensland that I did. I've done a lot of these, but here's one example. This was a public sector environment, by the way. I'm just going to say that much. And what I'll say is that we actually surveyed the workplace before and after, and these were the statements and these are the aggregates. So I'm not going to go through all the nuts and bolts and details, but you can just get a sense of what happened. Same questions to the same people 6 months later after only 5 conversations. 5 conversations. And then the survey. Communication between management and staff is reasonably good most of the time. Started at 50, went to 77. Bosses talked to me about ways to improve job satisfaction. Almost double. Boss has discussed strengths and talents with me. Well, obviously one of the conversations is about that, but nevertheless, isn't it great to see it go from 43 to 72? My boss has given me feedback on my strengths and talents. That's increased. By the way, this organisation had very low morale and I would not have called it a psychologically safe workplace under any circumstances. That's why they called me in. The boss is very aware of my strengths and talents, went up again. I'm just giving you a sense of how this works. I have not received enough. Now, this is an inverted question, but essentially, I've not received enough feedback from my work. My boss, it actually doubled because people felt comfortable to give feedback because they were in a regular dialogue with their team members. I feel my boss is getting the best out of me in my current role. Wow, that's not going to impact on productivity? I think so. I've discussed strategies to grow and develop my current role with my boss. Wow, that's great. And here's some statements that came from the survey. I've taken out any names and things, but you can get a sense of what people are saying. Key points are that it's not intrusive. It breaks down barriers. It actually generates more conversations because people feel more comfortable raising issues. And it improves engagement. So, you can see that there's been some magnificent results out of it. Now, if you stop doing this after 5, does that mean you've done your job? Well, no, because obviously things will drop off and things won't go well. So the idea is that you've got to keep it going. But once you get survey results like that, it's a bit silly not to keep going when you're getting great feedback on how things are moving. Just to give you a sense of how it works, if we're working in a partnership together, how it would work is we assess the organisation up front. So that's how I got that. I need a baseline. I need to understand what's going on. So there's 50 statements, 10 for each of the 5 conversations. It's done online in about 10 to 15 minutes. That produces data. And I then induct the whole workplace in 2 hours. It can either be done online or it can be done face to face. Why do we do that? Well, people need to understand what this is all about. Why are we doing it? Is it a performance review in disguise? We then have group coaching where I get 5 or 6 managers together, once every couple of months or maybe once every 6 weeks, and we talk about how their conversations are going. So they learn from each other, and there's peer group learning. It's enormously powerful. So one might say, I can't get so-and-so to speak up. And then one of the other managers in the group coaching session will say, I know what to do. What's that? Pause. Don't say anything. Or another will say, I can't get someone to shut up. They say, well, have you tried paraphrasing? And so they learn from each other. At the end of each month, there's a broadcast that I give for that organisation on the next conversation coming up, because I want them all to understand what's next, why we're doing it, what's involved. It's only a short 30-minute webinar. And many people say, well, do leaders need training to do this? Well, the training is actually in the doing. It's so simple that when you put people into this process, they're actually learning. So a lot of the leadership development is actually by them engaging with their team members. And I accept that some people find that difficult, but they learn a lot about themselves. And then they've got the safety net of being able to have a group coaching session and working with me if necessary. At the end of the cycle, we then reassess the workplace. And we we need to see some tangible evidence that this is working. And then, of course, it's just that. Can you imagine what your organisation would be like if every single leader had 10, 20-minute conversations a year with each of their direct reports? Can you imagine what that would be like? That's where we're going with that. So that's the process. I'm just about done because I'm sure you've got a couple of questions. Quickly, the benefits are it's ongoing, it's open and direct, it's flexible in the sense that people can do this anywhere. You can do it on a park bench. You can do this anywhere. You can do it at a coffee shop. You can do it anywhere at all. It's also, it's timely, you're actually getting timely feedback, and of course, it's more relaxed. And people actually comment about how much they enjoy it once they get into the rhythm of it. So, folks, that's pretty much it from me. You've probably got some questions, and I've got a few minutes left. So how about I just stop sharing? So feel free to just unmute yourself and go for it. There's probably some in the chat box as well, but I'll just see how we go with this.